crowd in Carrick's Hollow howled with contempt. They had witnessed countless public executions, but never a victim as pathetic as the scrawny human dragged from Earth's low-gravity nurseries. The announcer mocked him as the weakest specimen ever culled. The Voskath warbeast flexed its serrated claws while the arena chanted for a swift, humiliating kill. The first blow shattered bone and sent the man tumbling through the sand. But as broken skin hit the ground, a cold mechanical hum ignited beneath it. Long-dormant combat augmentations, surgically buried in a forgotten black site program, finally awakened. The laughter was about to turn to silence. This was the 34th Imperial Bloodsport cycle, a ritual humiliation meant to broadcast humanity's evolutionary inferiority across the galaxy. The empires in the stands had paid fortunes to watch the death of Earth's weakest specimen, but they never considered why the prisoner had been so easy to capture. The monster wasn't in the arena with him. It was waking up inside the victim, and the galaxy was about to learn a terrifying new definition of human. The prisoner had no name that day, but the arena files labeled him DS-47. He'd been scooped up during a routine slaver raid on a fringe outpost, and to the xeno-traffickers, he was just another bag of flesh with a weak heartbeat. His captors ran the standard bioscans and laughed at the results. Below average muscle density, fragile calcium-based skeleton, barely any neural defensive reflexes. On the Galactic Combat Index, he scored so low that the bookmakers refused to take bets on him lasting more than 15 seconds. What the scans failed to detect, because the genetic cloaking was that good, was the microscopic lattice of dormant nanoweave already woven through every major muscle group, waiting for a very specific trigger. That trigger had been designed by Project Chimera, a black site initiative buried so deep in Earth's pre-expansion records that even most high command officers didn't know it existed. In the early days of First Contact, military strategists realized humanity would never win a fair fight against species with natural armor and plasma-based biology. So they built a weapon that looked like a victim. Volunteers were augmented with subdermal impact plating, carbon filament tendons, and a targeting AI that linked directly to the optic nerve. Then the conscious memory of the surgery was wiped. The soldiers were released to live normal lives, unaware they were walking sleeper agents. Extreme physical trauma was the only key that could wake the monster inside. The Voskath champion, a beast called Krelag the Sunderer, had never faced anything that could get up after his first strike. He had crushed 23 opponents in this cycle alone, and the alien crowds adored him. He stomped toward the downed human, raising both serrated claws for the executioner's blow. The announcer screamed for the galaxy to witness the final moment, but Krelag paused. Something was wrong. The sand around the human's body was vibrating, not from the Colosseum's roar but from a high-frequency hum. It grew louder, a cold mechanical screech that cut through the jeers, and then the prisoner's eyes snapped open, not with fear, but with a targeting reticle glowing crimson against the dark irises. All at once, dormant impact plating locked into place beneath bruised skin, reforming shattered ribs into a reinforced cage. Nanofiber tendons wove through shredded quadriceps, pulling torn muscle back into alignment with terrifying precision. In the span of 2 seconds, every weak point on Krelag's anatomy was highlighted in visceral red: the gaps between armored scales, the nerve clusters beneath the jaw, the unarmored joint behind the left knee. The human rose, not like a man standing up but like a machine unfolding from a box it was never meant to be locked inside. The crowd's laughter didn't just stop. It froze in 10,000 throats because the thing standing in the sand no longer moved like prey. It moved like a surgeon with a grudge, and the first strike shattered Krelag's knee backwards before the champion even registered the motion. The arena fell silent, and somewhere in the Emperor's box, a high-ranking observer whispered a single word: Chimera. The word hung in the air of the Emperor's private box like a toxin. The observer who had whispered it, a gaunt figure draped in diplomatic silks, pushed back his seat and vanished into a service corridor before the guards could even register his departure. His transmission array was already glowing with a priority burst to a dead-drop relay somewhere in the outer rim. In the arena below, the announcer's voice cracked as Krellag's severed arm thudded into the sand, spraying indigo blood across the front row of horrified dignitaries. The human moved like something physics had given up trying to predict. A reverse joint strike shattered the champion's other knee, and when the massive beast collapsed, the prisoner drove a flat palm into the exposed nerve cluster beneath its jaw. Krellag the Sunderer, terror of the 34th cycle, convulsed once and went still. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the Colosseum erupted into chaos. Aliens of a dozen species scrambled from their seats, knocking over concession drones, trampling silk cushions. The bookmakers' terminals flashed with impossible refund notices. But the announcer, a veteran showman named Orvex, had been trained to control narrative. Kill the feed, he hissed into his comms, but someone had already cut the primary broadcast. Only the secondary pirate streams remained, spreading the images across darknet channels in real time. The galaxy was watching something no empire could spin. Orvex switched to the internal security channel. Activate station defense grid, section gamma. Lethal force authorized. The floating Colosseum's automated plasma turrets swiveled toward the arena floor, their capacitors cycling with a high-pitched whine. The human's targeting HUD painted each turret in amber threat indicators. His body reacted before his conscious mind could process. The nanofiber tendons in his legs compressed and released, launching him sideways in a blur. The first plasma bolt scorched the sand where his head had been a tenth of a second earlier. He rolled, snatched a chunk of shattered carapace from the floor, and hurled it with biomechanical precision. The improvised projectile severed the power coupling on the nearest turret, which exploded in a shower of sparks. But the turrets were only the first wave. The human's optic sensor array blinked with new data, 24 thermal signatures converging from the Eastern Service tunnels. Arena enforcers, heavy reptilians in riot armor carrying electrolances and kinetic shields. The augmentations fed tactical analysis directly into his motor cortex. He could see their formation, their blind spots, their reaction times. And he could feel something else, a rising flood of previously suppressed memories. Faces. A laboratory. A voice saying, "You will not remember this." The black site program was clawing its way back into his consciousness with every surge of artificial adrenaline. He remembered the name they gave him, Dead Switch, the failsafe that activates when everything else fails. In the generator levels far below the arena, a young xeno-engineer named Tivik was the first to notice the anomaly. The station's power grid was registering a massive, localized energy spike that didn't match any weapon signature in the database. It wasn't plasma, kinetic, or disruptor-based. It was biochemical, a perfectly synchronized cascade of adrenaline, cortisol, and a synthetic compound the sensors couldn't identify. Tivik's supervisor dismissed it as faulty readings, but the engineer was already pulling records from the slaver ship's manifest. The prisoner's origin flagged a restricted intelligence packet, a Level 0 quarantine notice from the Terran Oversight Committee, dated 17 standard years earlier. The file was titled simply, Chimera Retroactive Containment. Do not engage. Tivik's hands trembled as he read the warning. Chimera operatives were never supposed to be captured. They were designed for total deniability. Bodies engineered to self-destruct if any foreign entity attempted surgical examination. But the slavers had used a stun net, not a med scan, and the augmentations had remained inert until the precise physiological threshold of imminent death was crossed. Now they were fully awake and the quarantine protocols had been breached. Tivik hit the general alarm, but it was already too late. The human wasn't just fighting to survive. He was becoming the weapon that was meant to be buried forever. Inside the Emperor's box, a junior security officer finally noticed the empty seat where the gaunt observer had sat. The seat's embedded identity chip registered a name, Ambassador Dorian Vall, diplomatic envoy from the Terran sovereignty. The officer ran a priority check. No Dorian Vall existed in any Terran registry. The credentials were forged. and the last burst transmission had been relayed to a classified Terran military bounce point used exclusively by the Department of Covert Extraction. The observer wasn't just a witness. He was a handler, and he was calling in the only extraction team insane enough to breach an active arena lockdown. The human didn't know any of this. He was carving a path through the enforcers, his movements a horrifying blend of surgical precision and desperate fury. An electrolance grazed his shoulder, and the impact plating solidified instantly, dispersing the charge across his dermal lattice. He grabbed the weapon's shaft, twisted, and drove the butt through the visor of the next attacker. His breathing was ragged, but his targeting HUD kept updating the threat matrix. The eastern corridor led to a maintenance shaft that connected to the lower docking levels. That was his only exit, but the corridor was now sealed by a blast door. Then a voice crackled through his auditory implant, a direct neural link hijack bypassing his external receivers. It was calm, measured, but urgent. Dead switch, listen carefully. The blast door will open in 30 seconds. Proceed to docking arm 7, berth 12. A ship is waiting. Do not engage any further hostiles. The human froze. The voice was familiar in a way that made his chest tighten, like a memory of pain or training or both. "Who are you?" he subvocalized, the words translated into a tight beam signal. The response came with a name that had been missing from his shattered memory until this exact moment. "I'm the man who programmed your contingency. My name is Vol. You're a Chimera asset. You always were. Now move." The blast door irised open, and the human sprinted through, the weight of 17 years of buried identity settling onto his shoulders like new armor. The station's public address system suddenly broadcast a new alert, not from the announcer, but from the highest-ranking alien military commander aboard. By order of the Xyloc Imperium High Council, the vessel identified as DS-47 is declared a hostile existential threat. All available forces are authorized for immediate termination. The human kept running, because the truth was both a cage and a key, and the galaxy had just opened the door. The maintenance shaft dumped him into a service corridor 2 decks below the main concourse. Red alert klaxons hammered against the bulkheads, and the station's artificial gravity stuttered for half a second. Someone had already started rerouting power to weapons. The human's targeting HUD overlaid the schematic Vol had pushed through his implant, a glowing path twisting through coolant pipes and disused loading bays toward docking arm 7. Berth 12. A ship. A way out. But the schematic also blinked with dozens of hostile markers converging from the upper levels, and the newly minted existential threat designation had just unlocked every locked door between the Xyloc Navy and this floating coliseum. He broke into a sprint, bare feet slapping cold metal grating. The impact plating under his skin had fully hardened now, turning his torso into a segmented carapace that shifted with his breath. He caught his reflection in a polished maintenance panel, eyes still crimson, veins along his neck pulsing with a faint silver glow. He didn't recognize himself. The augmentations were no longer just tools. They were rewriting him in real time, and the ghost of his old face was fatting behind a mask of living weaponry. Another burst transmission hit his auditory implant. Vol again, but this time there was static beneath the words, a stress fracture in the handler's calm. The extraction window is collapsing. A Xyloc destroyer just broke from the outer patrol and is burning hard for the station. You have maybe 6 minutes before they get a firing solution on the entire docking ring. Move. The human didn't bother responding. He vaulted over a collapsed coolant manifold and landed in a loading bay where 3 arena enforcers were setting up a heavy repeating blaster. His HUD painted their weak points before his feet touched the deck. The first enforcer lost its weapon arm. The second took a knee strike to the throat and folded. The third managed to fire once, a wild shot that scorched the ceiling, before the human's elbow shattered the creature's helmet seal. He left them gasping and moved on. It was in the next junction that the wait, it gets worse moment arrived. The engineer Tivik, still deep in the generator levels, had finally decrypted the quarantine file's highest clearance layer. The Chimera augmentations weren't just dormant combat enhancements. They contained a synaptic overcharge failsafe, a dead man's switch designed to prevent capture of the technology. If the host's neural signature deviated too far from baseline mission parameters for more than 10 minutes, the implants would trigger a cascade overload. The resulting electromagnetic pulse would not only liquefy the host's brain but fry every unshielded system within a kilometer. Tivik stared at the readout in horror. The deviation timer had been running the moment DS-47 remembered his own name. They were all sitting inside a bomb. Meanwhile, the human reached the final stretch before docking Arm 7. The schematic in his head flickered, and a new contact appeared directly in his path. 6 life signs, human, heavily armed with military-grade biometric scramblers. The extraction team. He slowed to a walk, bare feet silent on the deck, and rounded the corner into berth 12. A matte black Terran stealth corvette sat hunched against the docking tube, its engines humming at idle. The forward hatch was open, and the 6 figures waiting in the bay were not a rescue. They were a termination squad. The lead operator stepped forward. His combat armor was glossy like beetle shell, and his eyes were hidden behind a faceless visor. "Dead switch," the operative said, voice flat. "You were supposed to die in that arena. A public, deniable death. Instead, you just became the galaxy's most expensive liability." The 5 others fanned out, raising suppressed coil rifles. The human, HUD cataloging their equipment, their stances, the microtells that revealed cross-training in at least 3 classified combat doctrines. These were his own people, Chimera handlers sent to bury their mistake. And then Tivik, desperate and afraid, did the one thing a junior engineer should never do. He patched his quarantine warning direct to the station-wide emergency channel. Every speaker in the Coliseum crackled with his shaking voice. "Attention all personnel. This is generator control. We have a containment anomaly. A captured Terran asset is carrying a Class 0 fail-safe device. If the asset is terminated or deviates from mission protocol, the device will detonate and render this entire station inoperable. I repeat, do not kill the prisoner. The fail-safe will kill us all." The termination squad leader tilted his head, processing the announcement on his own comms. For a long, perfect second, no one moved. Then the human smiled, a thin, humorless expression that belonged to the man he used to be. "Looks like you boys have a problem," he said. "You can't kill me without blowing this whole station. And you can't let me leave because I know too much." The squad leader's rifle barrel dropped a centimeter. Then the station lurched. The Zylok destroyer had just made orbit, and its first ranging shot vaporized an unmanned cargo tender 200 meters off the port bow. The corvette's proximity alarms screamed. The squad leader made a decision. "Neutralize and contain until we can extract the fail-safe. Do not terminate." The 5 others surged forward, stun prods crackling. The human's HUD calculated 97 viable counters. He chose the simplest one. Step sideways, let the first prod glance off his hardened arm, and use the attacker's momentum to hurl him into the second. The fight was fast, brutal, and entirely one-sided. In 12 seconds, 4 of the 6 operators were down, and the human had a coil rifle pressed to the squad leader's helmet. Val's voice cut through the chaos, suddenly urgent. "Don't kill him. I need you to listen. The original mission wasn't just an activation test. It was a message. The Zylok Imperium was going to attack Earth regardless. Your activation in front of their entire council was meant to show them what happens when they corner humans. You weren't the victim. You were the demonstration." The human's finger hovered over the trigger. The station shuddered again. Somewhere above, the Zylok destroyer was locking onto the docking ring. The fail-safe countdown in his HUD had just passed 8 minutes and was creeping towards 0. And now he understood. The whole Bloodsport circus, the ridicule, the public execution. It was all a theater designed by his own government, and he was the final act. The only question left was whether he would take down the house with him. He released the squad leader and turned toward the corvette. "Val, if you want me to finish this, you're going to unlock every weapon system on that ship and get me a direct channel to the Zylok flagship." The corvette's ramp lights flickered from red to green. "Get on board," Val said, "and try not to die before the 3rd act." The human pulled himself into the cockpit, the dead switch in his skull ticking down to the final minute, and the whole galaxy pressing in from every side. The Corvette's cockpit sealed around him with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The controls lit up without prompting. Vol had remotely unlocked the weapons, navigation, and comms. The human's targeting HUD seamlessly merged with the ship's threat display, painting the Xyloc destroyer in a halo of hostile red. The fail-safe timer blinked at 47 seconds. Not enough time for a dogfight, barely enough for a conversation. He opened the channel Vol provided, a priority override that would blast directly into the Xyloc flagship's bridge and every network node across the station. The entire Coliseum would hear this. "Destroyer command, this is Dead Switch," the human said, voice flat and resonant through the open comm. "You have been running a bloodsport circuit designed to humiliate humanity into submission. You assumed we were weak. You assumed wrong. The ship I am piloting contains a failsafe device that will detonate if I am killed or deviate from my mission protocol. That device will produce an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to render your primary reactor inert. Your shields will drop, your life support will fail, and the station you just wasted a ranging shot on will become the least of your problems." There was a crackle of interference, then a voice, cold and layered with the guttural harmonics of a Xyloc command officer. "You are bluffing." The human's HUD showed the failsafe reaching its final threshold, 15 seconds. He could feel the implant warming at the base of his skull, a deep thrumming pressure that told him the overload was real. He didn't flinch. "If I'm bluffing, you have 15 seconds to live." The display in the Corvette's cockpit suddenly flickered as the Xyloc sensors pinged the failsafe's energy signature. The countdown bled past 10 seconds. 9, 8. The officer's composure shattered. "Stand down all weapons. Pull the destroyer back to minimum safe distance. Do not engage." The lock-on alarm on the Corvette's console went silent. The destroyer's weapons powered down. The human watched the fail-safe timer hit 0. Nothing happened. Not because it was fake, but because Vol had remotely rewritten the mission parameters during those final seconds, tricking the implant's deviation logic into accepting the current state as a valid contingency. The dead switch clicked into standby. The bomb in his skull went dormant and the station didn't fry. Vol's voice returned, quieter, almost weary. "The demonstration is complete. The Xyloc Council just witnessed a single human, the so-called weakest specimen, force their entire destroyer to stand down through sheer reputational threat. Every intelligence agency watching this feed now knows. If Earth ever turns its black site assets loose, the galactic order changes overnight." The human exhaled slowly, his hands steady on the controls. "I was a scarecrow. You were the most effective scarecrow ever built," Vol said, "and you just saved more lives than any fleet ever could." The Corvette's engines hummed as it detached from the docking arm and slipped into open space. Behind it, the Coliseum's lights flickered back to normal, and the Xyloc fleet began a slow, dishonored retreat. Ambassador Dorian Vol, the real Vol, sent a final tight beam message to his asset, attaching a set of coordinates to a fringe system with a single word: exfil. The human didn't go to the coordinates. He looked at the nav chart, then at his own reflection in the cockpit glass. The crimson had faded from his eyes, but the silver veins remained, a permanent reminder of what lay dormant beneath his skin. He set a course for the outer rim, far from any Terran or Xyloc jurisdiction. His last act before shutting down the long-range comms was to send a single encrypted burst to the darknet relay where he knew all of this would eventually leak. One line: "Maybe you should stop testing what you don't understand." And then there was one final detail that no one, not even Vol, expected. Weeks later, as intelligence agencies dissected the pirate streams of the arena broadcast, a forensic analyst noticed something in the footage of the human's escape. The Corvette's registration transponder had briefly glitched during the undocking sequence, exposing a secondary ID buried beneath the stealth coating. It wasn't a Terran Corvette. It was a chimera, self-bootstrapping construct, fabricated on-site from raw materials harvested during the first seconds of the arena engagement. The ship itself had been printed by the human's own nanofabricator subroutines while he fought. He hadn't just escaped. He had manufactured his own exit while the galaxy watched, and no one even noticed until it was too late. The galaxy had called him the weakest human. They had dragged him into the light to prove a point about fragility and inferiority. Instead, they proved something humanity has always known, but rarely had to demonstrate on such a public stage. Evolution does not favor the strongest. It favors the most adaptable. And buried beneath the skin of every so-called ordinary human is a capacity for transformation that no scanner can measure and no empire can predict. The Chimera program may have been officially buried, but the genie is out of the bottle, and across the darknet relays, a single line of code keeps surfacing. Maybe you should stop testing what you don't understand. The lingering question is not whether Earth has more sleepers waiting for their moment. It is whether the rest of the galaxy will finally learn to stop mistaking a quiet species for a defenseless one. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is back a human into a corner and assume the fight is already over. If this story kept you glued to the screen, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic sci-fi tales every week. The universe is full of secrets, and we're just getting started.